Canal treaty that was signed in 1977. In recent weeks, the president-elect has been talking about how he wants to reverse that and get back the Panama Canal. Of course, this was one of the biggest legislative achievements that Jimmy Carter had. Republicans at the time supported it as well. Even John Wayne supported it. He included all of these people to get support for this. But Donald Trump seized upon that, even as he called Jimmy Carter a good man.
Look, I liked him as a man. I disagreed with his policy. So, hey, he thought giving away the Panama Canal was a good thing. I think it cost him the election. That and the hostages. I actually think that was a bigger factor because that's a deal that just should not have been made. But again, this was a question that was asked of me. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to bring up the Panama Canal because of Jimmy Carter's death.
And look, through the course of Jimmy Carter's life, he saw 17 American presidents, including Donald Trump. And it's quite extraordinary when you think that one of his biggest achievements there, which was controversial at the time in the 1970s, there's no question, but it reached bipartisan support. Now it is in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. But at that news conference earlier today, just 13 days before Donald Trump is indeed sworn into office, so many other headlines, including he said the Gaza hostages should be released before he takes office or all hell will break loose. He also declined to say if he would offer pardons for even the most violent offenders of January 6th, and on, a few other headlines. But Jake, it was Jimmy Carter who Donald Trump mentioned several times. And I'm thinking back to when Donald Trump was in office, there actually was somewhat of a conversation between the two men about relations with North Korea and China. But Jimmy Carter also said, yes, he was looking forward to living to 100, but he was also looking forward even more to voting for Kamala Harris, which he did in Georgia a couple months before he died. Jake?
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thanks so much. Let's go back to Wolf.
All right, Jake, I'm here with Caitlin and Jamie as well. And Caitlin, what do you make of Trump deciding to slam Jimmy Carter over the Panama Canal Treaty on this day?
Well, with the Panama Canal specifically with Jimmy Carter, when you look back at why he made that decision, there were a lot of people urging him not to take that on then. They talked about how much political capital it was going to take for him to get that done. They brought a lot of senators, actually, and had them visit the Panama Canal at the time to try to help build support here on Capitol Hill. They actually felt like it worked. I watched a recent interview that Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State did a few years ago. And just on that front, but when Jimmy Carter pursued that, as many of his aides were urging him not to, he felt that it was important because he didn't know if he'd have two terms. A lot of people said, wait until your second term to try to get something like this done. But he felt that it was important because it kind of speaks to the president Jimmy Carter was, that he would do things that were not always politically popular if he thought that they were right. And looking at his time in the presidency and what that looks like as Donald Trump is preparing to retake power, there are several things that Jimmy Carter did, that even norms that Trump then upended. He was the first president to disclose his tax returns. Every president after Jimmy Carter followed suit until, famously, Donald Trump did not, and still has not done so. And so it just speaks to how Jimmy Carter viewed that office and what it should look like. And also coming in, of course, at a time after Watergate when there was such little trust in the executive office, and he felt such a need to restore that after Richard Nixon left office a few years before and in the shadows of Watergate and what that looked like. He also required rigorous disclosures from executive branch staff because he thought it was so important that if you wanted to serve in the White House and you wanted to have a job, a taxpayer-funded role, that it was so important that you were willing to be able to share that information and be transparent with the American people.
That motorcade is heading towards the U.S. Navy Memorial here in Washington, not far from where we are up on Capitol Hill.
Wolf, to underscore what Caitlin just said, both Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump do have one thing in common. They were Washington outsiders. But when you get past that, I think you could not imagine two more different leaders. From the things you were talking about, and Stuart Eizenstat mentioned earlier, he cut the White House staff down. He didn't want senior staff to have car services. And also, if you think about Jimmy Carter after the White House, one of the most enduring images that I think most Americans have of Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter had to do with, did I lose a microphone here? There we go. Habitat for Humanity. President Carter and Rosalind Carter worked with Habitat for Humanity for, I think, about 35 years. They helped to build, repair, renovate about, I think it's 4,500 houses in 14 countries with more than 100,000 volunteers. And the reason for doing that was because of the importance of affordable housing, something that Jimmy Carter cared about. And so from Habitat to Humanity to going back to his home in Plains, Georgia, where he lived this very simple life, two very different men.
And what's so beautiful is that as right now as the nation is preparing to pay tribute to them, there's still families living in those homes and enjoying the fruits of that labor and what Jimmy Carter passed on to other people. But I'll say just really quickly, Wolf, as Jake was mentioning there, the Inspectors General Act that President Carter proposed and signed into law initially for those 12 agencies, the ramifications of that are still felt here in Washington by none other than former President Trump, now President-elect Trump. His first impeachment may not have happened because we may never have known about his call with Ukrainian President Zelensky had it not been for a whistleblower that obviously infuriated Trump so much at the time, but it just speaks to the ramifications of that.
It certainly does. We're tracking the Carter motorcade as it makes its way to here in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Navy Memorial. Stay with us to see the late president's farewell journey through the nation's capital. Right now, a quick break. This is CNN's special coverage of the state funeral of Jimmy Carter.
I lay on my back, frozen, thinking the darkest thoughts. And then everything changed. Dana said, "You're still you, and I love you."
Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, February 2nd on CNN.
Honey? But the gains are pumping.
Dad, is Mommy a finance bro?
She switched careers to make money for your weddings.
Ooh, the Asian market is blowing up. Hey, who wants shots, huh?
Shots?
Of milk.
The right money moves aren't as aggressive as you think.
A vacation starts with how you get there. A private jet experience from One Flight's budget. You've got to see this. Plug in your itinerary, search from over 5,000 planes, pay, and you're on your way. Nothing better than a personalized meal on board.
It should be a beautiful day in the Bahamas, Mr. Hirschbach. We should be landing in about 20 minutes.
A great vacation always starts with your flight experience.
Call for a complimentary flight.
When you get approved with Drive Time, you get the real deal.
It's the Drive Time Real Deal Maker.
It lets you customize the real down payment and monthly payment of the car you want to buy.
That's super smart. And the deal you make on your phone is the deal you pay.
You make the deal yourself.
Get the real deal at drivetime.com.
You don't stop being you just because you turn 65. But you do face more risk from flu and COVID. Last year alone, those viruses hospitalized nearly 1 million people 65 and older. 1 million? Vaccines lower your risk of getting really sick, so you can keep doing you.
Explore the world the Viking way. From the quiet comfort of elegant small ships with no children and no casinos. We actually have reinvented ocean voyages, designing all-inclusive experiences for the thinking person. Viking, voted world's best by both Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast Traveler. Learn more at Viking.com.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, ride your bike. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it.
If you're happy and you know it, smile big and bright.
Thousands of kids just like me are happy every day.
And it's all because of generous people like you who support Shriners Hospitals for Children every month.
All you have to do is call the number on your screen or go online to loveshriners.org right now with your monthly gift.
Because of people like you, Shriners Hospitals for Children is able to make an everyday miracle happen for kids like me. If you're happy and you know it, dance around. If you're happy and you know it, play a song.
If you're happy and you know it, and your face will surely show it.
If you're happy and you know it, take a shot.
And when you call or go online right now to donate $19 a month or more, we'll send you this adorable Love to the Rescue blanket as a thank you and a reminder of all the smiles you're bringing to kids' faces every day.
Will today be the day you send your love to the rescue?
When you call the number on your screen right now and give as little as $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you'll be making a life-changing difference for a child, just like Sarah.
Your monthly gift today could change your life forever.
Because of you.
We are happy and we know it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please call or go online right now to give. If operators are busy, please wait patiently or go to loveshriners.org right away.
Kobe, the making of a legend, premieres January 25th on CNN.
President Jimmy Carter's motorcade, as you can see, stopped on the streets of Washington, D.C., right at the United States Navy Memorial. That is where his remains will be moved from the hearse to the caisson, the artillery wagon, the traditional transport for Commander-in-Chief there at the Navy Memorial. Now, Jimmy Carter's family is going to be there. There will be a selection of musical pieces played, one of them hailed to the chief, here at the Navy Memorial. As the procession continues, it will, of course, end there in the United States Capitol, where Jimmy Carter will lie in state ahead of his formal state funeral on Thursday. But in just these next few moments, we will hear those next selections. Important to emphasize here, of course, that these are musical selections and moments that were chosen by Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter over these past 30 years, that they knew that this eventuality would come, and all the way back in 1986 began planning it. Boris Sanchez is on Pennsylvania Avenue. Carter's funeral procession will pass by there. And Boris, there are many there gathered to see this moment in history, this moment of pageantry and somber moment in American history. What are people telling you who have come out amidst the weather and the cold there in Washington?
Yeah, Aaron, several hundred mourners gathered here on Constitution Avenue, where that horse-drawn caisson is set to emerge as part of the funeral procession in just moments once it leaves the Navy Memorial. Several of the folks that I've spoken to here have come from across the nation to pay their final respects to President Carter, and one of them, Rebecca Lewis, actually came from Pittsburgh, braving the elements to be here today. And I wonder, what is it that motivated you to be here in person to say farewell to President Carter?
I just wanted to honor someone who is so important in my life. I just have the greatest deal of respect for him as a person who lived his life in love and in service, guided by his great faith. And it's an honor to be here. And the caisson hasn't gone by yet, and I'm very moved just to anticipate seeing his body today.
You mentioned President Carter's faith, and you had mentioned to me previously that you had an opportunity a few years ago to watch him teach Sunday school. I wonder what you think he will be most remembered for, and how his faith plays a part of his legacy.
That's a really good question. I did go down and attend his Sunday school. I taught for 30-some years, I believe, in Plains, Georgia, in a small Baptist church, and I went down in August of 2019. And I was so inspired by him that the world's greatest leader could very humbly and very gently talk about his faith. Yeah, you had the part of your question.
That was it. Rebecca, we're going to let you get to watching that horse-drawn caisson as it steadily approaches us here on Constitution Avenue. Thank you so much for sharing this moment with us. And Aaron, we should point out, as that procession approaches just moments ago, the street honor cordon moved into place. These are U.S. service members. Actually, these appear to be Navy service members standing right before us to greet the former president as he makes his way over to the U.S. Capitol. Aaron.
All right, Boris, thank you very much. And of course, Jimmy Carter going to be at the U.S. Navy Memorial, where they will transfer that hearse to the caisson. And the Naval Memorial, Tim Naftali, of course, crucial to him. He chose these points. He is, and I actually find this fascinating. I would never have thought this to be true unless I knew it to be true, that Jimmy Carter is the only U.S. president to have graduated from the Naval Academy.
Yes, and there's another very important part of his biography that we should mark today. Until December, he was the last living president who had been on active duty in World War II. He did not serve in a combat zone, but when you become a midshipman, you enter the U.S. military, and as Kai Bird knows much better than me, Jimmy Carter entered the Naval Academy in 1943. And so this is the end of an era in presidential history. This is our last president who had World War II experience. He is the last of the greatest generation. And he's also the last president who was a veteran of the Korean War. He was certainly on duty during the Korean War. I don't know if he was stationed in the Pacific. I think he was in the Atlantic. But in any case, there is an enormous amount of history represented by this visit to the Naval Memorial. It's not just because Jimmy Carter liked the National Archives, which was across the street. It's also because I don't think you can understand Jimmy Carter without keeping in mind what he learned in the military and what he learned from Captain Hyman Rickover. Jimmy Carter is always remembered as a peanut farmer. Yes, true. Jimmy Carter was also an engineer. He was also a nuclear engineer. He was a submariner. This is a complicated, highly professional, highly skilled man, and I hope all aspects of this man will be remembered as we pass through today and, of course, Thursday.
Yep, true polymath. Kai, I am also in this moment as we see Jimmy Carter, his body moving, this procession, this pomp and circumstance that we are going to see at a moment of profound, it's an unsettled nation. Let's just put it that way. Whatever your politics are, I think we all know it's an unsettled moment. You are going to see 5 U.S. presidents together at his funeral. Former President Trump, soon to be President Trump, President Biden, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Obama, they're all going to be together. They were not all together at Biden's inauguration. Trump refused to go. Carter was ill. So this is the first time they've all been together since George H.W. Bush's funeral. And of course, they weren't all presidents. But they will actually be together. And, you know, I just am thinking back, talking to Jimmy Carter 10 years ago, and I asked him about his legacy. He said, you know, what's your greatest legacy? He said, I would say keeping the peace. I kept my country at peace during very difficult times. And it is his passing that is actually causing this moment of these presidents to come together when the country so desperately needs it.
Absolutely. And I'd like to think that these 5 presidents will, you know, memorialize Jimmy Carter's life and remember his dedication to human rights and to peace. But speaking of him as a naval man, and he's now right at the Naval Memorial there, it reminds me of an extraordinary story that happened to him when he was a submarine officer serving. He was aboard a submarine in the Pacific. The submarine surfaced in a terrible storm. He was ordered to go up top and do watch duty. And suddenly a huge wave crashed into the submarine.
Like a rogue wave sort of a thing.
And swept him off, swept him into the Pacific Ocean. And seconds later, another wave swept him right back on top of the submarine. It's, he should have been dead, but he survived this. And it was an extraordinary experience in his life. Secondly, I can't help but notice that, you know, Jimmy Carter served for 7 years in the Navy under then Captain Hyman Rickover, developing nuclear submarine technology. And he decided to leave after 7 years to abandon a very promising career in the Navy for two reasons. One, his father suddenly died of pancreatic cancer, which ran in the family. And he went back and he was impressed by what his father had done, and he needed to go back. But he also later told, many years later, he told one of his aides, Peter Bourne, that he just couldn't, he had decided he didn't want to associate the rest of his life with nuclear weapons, these weapons of mass destruction. He was, in fact, from his religious faith, I believe, a man dedicated to peace.
And the body bearers are getting into position right now outside that U.S. Navy Memorial because they are going to be moving the hearse to that horse-drawn caisson that the woman from Pittsburgh that Boris was talking about was already anticipating how moving it would be to see that moving through the streets of Washington. Hearing those horse hooves echo on this snowy day as they head to the Capitol for that lying in state. Kate, when you look back at all of the importance of these presidents being together, it is an interesting moment. When Carter passed away, Trump was gracious about it. He is going to be attending this funeral. Of course, he was not invited to John McCain's funeral, right? So it was a moment. You know, though, that from your reporting and work, that they actually had spoken, Trump and Carter.
They did. In 2019, actually, President Trump called Carter, and Carter was down in Plains having dinner at his friend Jill Stuckey's house, as the Carters often did. It was a buffet dinner with paper plates. This is how down to earth these folks were. And suddenly he gets a call from the White House, and they say that President Trump is on the phone to speak to you. They spoke for about 10 minutes about China and trade. And, you know, Carter went back to the buffet line and served himself and sat quietly. I think that Carter, at the beginning of Trump's presidency, was interested in going to North Korea. He was interested in staying diplomatically engaged. You know, this was, I think sometimes we look at Jimmy Carter and it's almost, you know, it's an impossible story to believe. It's not, you know, the cliche that he was just such a godly person who wanted to serve. It's hard for people to really believe that this was true. But he was also a politically savvy person. He wanted to stay in politics. When the Bidens went to visit him in 2021, there's that photo of the Bidens flanking them.
Yeah, flanking them when they're in the chairs.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, he didn't want to come out to the front. Dr. Biden was the one who came out because he didn't want reporters to be shouting questions. He didn't want to have to answer questions and be critical of anything that the Biden administration was doing. So he said he had a swimming lesson and left.
Can I just, one thing you said, though, when Trump calls him and he's at this buffet dinner with paper plates, and they speak for 10 minutes about China. So is the context on this that Trump, in taking on China, actually reached out to Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
Who, of course, was so central in the U.S. relationship with China?
Absolutely. And I think the context is also, as Kai's book says, I mean, these are two fellow outliers. And Trump, I think, and when I interviewed President Trump and asked what he thought about Jimmy Carter, and he was actually most sympathetic to Jimmy Carter at that point, because he said he wasn't, you know, somebody who played by the rules. And
of all former presidents,
yes.
He highlighted Carter.
Yes, because at the time there were 5 living presidents, and, you know, President Trump has always felt outside of that club, and Jimmy Carter, in that famous photo in the Oval Office, is physically standing apart from the other presidents. He did not play by the same rules. He criticized them in office. And Trump does the same thing, except in a much different way.
And it's hard to understand. Conversations to hear about.
It is. And I think it's hard to remember that in this age where we have very elderly presidents, that when Carter left office, he was in his mid-50s. I mean, there was a lot of time to go.
Yes.
And so he really had to reimagine his life in a fundamental way. And if he wasn't going to do it with, going on tour and sitting on corporate boards and all of that stuff. And he was coming back to a massive amount of debt. And I'll leave that to the historians here to talk about. He had to figure out a way to make a way for himself politically in the world when he felt like he had been massively rejected in so many ways, and progressives in general, because Senate candidates up and down the ticket that year that he lost also lost. Just like this moment that Democrats are having right now, Democrats at that time and with Carter, they were in the middle of really feeling lost, and he found a way forward.
It is fascinating, though, all of this, hearing that Trump calls Carter, they talk about China, that when Kate interviewed President Trump, he had a connection with Carter more than anybody else. When you think about the perceiving themselves to both be outliers, Tim, and yet their personalities, their styles, everything about them could not be more different.
Exactly. Well, part of the answer might be the fact that President Trump understood, or President-elect Trump now understood, that Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama were not close. And that might have been an opening for Trump, and because he was also not close to Barack Obama.
Can I do another theory? Another theory is that when Carter came to Washington, people were calling him a hayseed. They were looking down on him and his Southern roots. And we know Trump has always been sensitive to being looked down on by the elites of the Northeast.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we continue to watch this, the hearse moving through Washington, Carter's casket is about to be placed on that horse-drawn carriage at the Navy Memorial, and then the funeral procession to the Capitol will get underway in that caisson carriage. Squeeze in a very quick break and be right back.
The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper is a 5-time Emmy winner for long-form journalism. This week is over-tourism threatening Venice. The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper, Sunday at 8 on CNN.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here.
Honey, but the gains are pumping.
Dad, is Mommy a finance bro?
She switched careers to make money for your weddings.
Ooh, the Asian market is blowing up. Hey, who wants shots, huh?
Shots?
Of milk.
The right money moves aren't as aggressive as you think.
The itch and rash of moderate to severe eczema disrupts my skin night and day. Despite treatment, it's still not under control. But now I have Rinvoq. Rinvoq is a once-daily pill that reduces the itch and helps clear the rash of eczema fast. Some taking Rinvoq felt significant itch relief as early as 2 days, and some achieved dramatic skin clearance as early as 2 weeks. Many saw clear or almost clear skin.
Rinvoq can lower ability to fight infections. Before treatment, test for TB and do blood work. Serious infections, blood clots, some fatal. Cancers including lymphoma and skin, serious allergic reactions, GI tears, death, heart attack, and stroke occurred. CV event risk increases in age 50 plus with a heart disease risk factor. Tell your doctor if you've had these events: infection, Hep B or C, smoked, are pregnant, or planning. Don't take if allergic or have an infection.
Disrupt the itch and rash of eczema. Talk to your dermatologist about Rinvoq.
Learn how AbbVie can help you save.
For more than a decade, Farxiga has been trusted again and again and again.
Farxiga.
Ask your doctor about Farxiga.
At Grainger, we know the ones who get it done wear a lot of hats. That's why we're always here for you with professional-grade products and the knowledge to help answer tough product questions. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
What's going on? Cameras off! All live cams off! What's going on here? They just took us off the air. Get out of my studio!
Turn the cameras back on.
Everyone is raving about September 5.
There's a hostage situation in the Olympic Village.
It's masterful and heart-pounding.
People are going to want to see it.
Don't miss one of the best movies of the year.
We can't make one mistake.
September 5, rated R.
When you're the leader in disaster cleanup and restoration, how do you make like it never even happened happen? Let it rain, Randy! Woo! Yeah! By being prepared for anything! Woo!
Serve Pro, like it never even happened.
Substance use disorder and addiction is so isolating. And so, as a Black woman in recovery, hope must be loud. It grows louder when you ask for help and you're vulnerable. It is the thread that lets you know that no matter what happens, you will be okay. Judy.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here.
Wait.
What?
I can't drive.
Why?
My.
Oh.
All There Is with Anderson Cooper. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
You're looking at live pictures. There's the caisson and a hearse from the U.S. Navy Memorial here in Washington, D.C., as the nation's capital comes together to salute President Jimmy Carter. There are a number of members of the Carter family there, in addition to their 4 adult children, Jack, Chip, Jeff, and Amy. They had 22 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Jimmy and Rosalind Carter among them, 38 total. And it looks like most, if not all of them, are there honoring the president. You also, at some point, will see, if not hear, the sound of the riderless horse. Let's bring back our panel. We also have with us James Fallows. You may know him as a journalist, but before that, he was President Carter's chief White House speechwriter. Good to have you here, Jim. And a famous quote of yours is that, trying to underline how much President Carter was not one for the trappings of the office, that teaching him to give a speech was like teaching FDR to tap dance, you said.
That was with all the cocksureness of being in one's mid-20s and trying to see the ways in which all the things that the world has seen as admirable in Jimmy Carter over these decades could be more effectively put to use.
Yeah, let's just listen in as they move the casket now, and I'll come back to you in a second.
March.
Ready. Down. Ready. Step. Set. Ready. Pace. Walk hard. Left about. Forward. Ready. Step.
So we are awaiting the procession to begin down Pennsylvania Avenue. It is evocative, but not the same direction as when the newly elected President Carter and First Lady Rosalynn Carter came to Washington and were walking the other way, getting out of the presidential limo to greet everyone. And now we have this final journey. We just heard from the U.S. Navy Band not only Hail to the Chief, but the Christian hymn, Just As I Am Without One Plea. Jim Fellows, you were talking about what it was like working for, as chief speechwriter, President Carter, who didn't really like all the pageantry and pomp and circumstance.
He did not, and as my friend Stu Eisenstadt knows very well from having known Carter for the longest time of any of us, part of his appeal, part of what made him so magical in that campaign year of 1976. And I think the first year or two of his administration was a sense of cutting through pomp, being somebody who understood the feelings of a wide range of Americans. He connected black and white people, rock music fans, country music fans, people. He rallied the South behind him. And so it was, one of the things he did was carrying his own bags in and out of the plane. I think that was initially of necessity. It became sort of a shtick. Would you agree, Stu?
Yes, absolutely.
But it was something that was sort of his trademark. And so I think that it is, I'm thinking, as I imagine Stu is too, 48 years ago, with a week or two's difference, this inaugural parade, it was similar to today in being freezing cold. My memory, which again, maybe Stu, you could check, is they were using blowtorches to melt the ice off the sidewalks in DC. It was that cold. We have a blizzard now. And I think that it is a tribute to Jimmy Carter's respect for the office and his naval heritage and all the ways in which he's put the office to use, that he now is having this official, dignified ceremony with everything involved.
It's really a metaphor that for his inauguration, as Jim said, it was one of the coldest days.
The procession.
And now
procession
he's coming out.
It's beginning right now, just to say they're walking, and we should note that the 5 branches of the military that were in existence when President Carter was president are standing on either side of the caisson where his casket is. I'm sorry, Stu, go ahead. If you want to keep, I'm sorry.
Yes, I was saying it's a metaphor. Jim was suggesting that he came to Washington and was inaugurated in one of the coldest days of the year, and here he's leaving us in one of the coldest days of the year. It's life coming full circle.
So there's something else I would like to check my friend Stu with. My impression is that through every chapter of his life, Jimmy Carter was exactly the same person. That's what we hear from childhood stories, when he was running for president, in office and after that. And the traits that made him so effective as a former president for these nearly 44 years, his insistence on doing things his own way, his faith and guidance, his determination that he could meet people of any level in any part of the world, they were a resounding success during his time as former president. As Stu has written, he accomplished more during his 4 years in office than most people give him credit for. But I think the same traits were a through line that they didn't work so well with Tip O'Neill as they did in battling the guinea worm or winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. But there was no artifice about him. He was what you saw. It was not made up, and he was really felt himself to be a man of the people. He worked the soil. He was a farmer. He grew up in a home, a farm with no insulation, no electricity, and the water came from a well. He took showers in a bucket with holes in it. And that's the background. But one other thing that's very, very important, and that is his county was 60% black. His playmates were black. He had a second set of parents who were black that he spent many, many nights with. And he understood the black experience more than any white politician I've ever seen.
And Anita McBride, each president, when they plan their own funeral and they know they're going to lie in state in the Capitol, decides a different part of the Congress that they want to enter. I'm going to ask you about that in 1 second, but let's listen in as the marching begins. So Anita McBride, presidents schedule their funerals, prepare their funerals, sometimes decades in advance. And each one knowing that they will lie in state in the rotunda of the Capitol, they have different options as to how they enter the Capitol. Tell us about that.
Well, and how they want to be remembered. What is a reflection of their time here in Washington or who they are as individuals? In fact, today, of course, President Carter, Quezon, will arrive at the East Plaza of the Capitol. When Ronald Reagan arrived, he wanted to be brought the West Side because it faced California, his home state. Gerald Ford wanted to be brought through the House chamber because he served in the House. So again, it is, you know, a reflection of who they are, how they want to be remembered. Dwight Eisenhower, interestingly, you know, as the man who served as head of our Allied troops in World War II, wanted to be buried in an $80 government-issued casket, and that the seal of the president was placed on it. But again, a nod to an extension of this was a man who led our soul.
Let's go back if we can, because you gentlemen who served in the Carter administration keep talking about that moment in 1977. There it is on the left side of your screen. President Carter, little Amy Carter, who entered public school here in Washington, D.C., Rosalind Carter, the First Lady. There they are walking down Pennsylvania Avenue. Is that the first time that it happened in the modern era?
It is the first time, and it's very interesting that about the first day in office, he went to the Justice Department and symbolically opened the doors because it had been such a closed, Nixon-oriented institution. So these were all ways of reinforcing his campaign message that it was time to have a common man who was going to open the government up, be transparent, be honest, I'll never lie to you. This was all part of the campaign that he tried to carry into the White House.
And, you know, on that, when you talk about common man of it all and of his legacy and of him, who he was constitutionally, the idea that he did meticulously plan this, as do most presidents and their families, and yet we're watching something that clearly, given the fact that he left Washington and most of his legacy post-Washington is what he really reveled in, all of his work that he did. But this is kind of classic for a statesman, for an ex-president. And I just wonder how comfortable he was with this, or whether or not he thought, I am a former president, so this has to happen, not necessarily for me, but for the country.
So I would agree with the latter. I think the dignity of the office, I think, is what he was recognizing here. I also wanted to mention something that happened about 30 minutes before that famous walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, which was the way he began his inaugural address, which was the famous words that I would like to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land. He was talking about Gerald Ford, whom he just defeated. He was talking about the pardon of Richard Nixon, which was very controversial then and now. It was probably a plus for us on the Carter campaign. It counted against Gerald Ford. But Carter decided that the first words he would say on being sworn in as president were recognizing what his predecessor had done through his lights to try to reconcile.
Correct me if I'm wrong, he invited Nixon to the inauguration, but he didn't attend, which was probably right for the best. As I'm watching this, I can't help but just think that this is part of what it means to be the United States of America. There are so many places in this world where there are kings and queens and families that have royal status effectively, and where there's a lot of pomp and circumstance. And in this country, we see this at two major junctures, when a president comes in and when they leave the world. And the thing that makes this, to me, incredibly poignant and important, and I can only speculate that if Jimmy Carter decided that this is the way that he wanted to go out, it was because this spectacle that we are seeing here is a commemoration of America and its institutions, and the institutions that he was a part of, both the presidency and the United States military. And I think it's almost like the inauguration for me personally, just to watch this, because we don't see this often as a country. And it's important to see that when we
celebrate our leaders, we do so under the auspices of the United States of America, not Jimmy Carter, the king, or any other president, the king or the queen. That's part of the tradition of this country, and it's so important.
Boris Sanchez is alongside the route of the procession. Boris?
Yeah, Jake, and we're just watching as the Military Honor Guard first approaches this part of Constitution Avenue, obviously followed by some advanced motorcade and then the National Color Guard. We should note there is a street honor cordon as well. These are military personnel that are set to render a hand salute as that horse-drawn caisson approaches. This obviously was an enormous undertaking by folks here in the nation's capital, in part because there was a large weather event over the weekend, and they've spent much of the last day and a half or so getting snow out of the way and getting guardrails up to host several hundred mourners that have come out to pay their final respects to President Carter as he makes his way from the U.S. Navy Memorial to the U.S. Capitol. And I should note it is not certainly warm out here. It's freezing temperatures outside. And I've spoken with several people that have come in from out of town because of the significance of this moment. And as that advanced motorcade moves further, we can see in the distance the actual caisson itself, where the former president's remains are. I spoke with a woman earlier from Pittsburgh who said that she had attended Sunday school watching President Carter speak to young folks and talking about his faith and the significance of this moment for her as someone who admired President Carter, both for his time in office but also his time as just an everyday citizen and his post-presidency and the things he did via Habitat for Humanity and other organizations to try to help folks. We'll send it back to you, Jake, as we watch the caisson get closer.
All right, and not including President Carter, a total of 12 U.S. presidents have lain and stayed in the Capitol Rotunda. Wolf Blitzer, the procession is making its way to you up there at the Capitol.
You know, it's interesting, Caitlin. I think they're going to be coming right behind us on their way to where they're going to be resting at the Capitol.
Yeah, Wolf, you can actually see people gathered on the steps from the view that we can see here from our vantage point of where the motorcade and where this procession will be coming. And as we're sitting here, Wolf, watching this procession happening and listening to the band that obviously accompanies every president, as you know, Wolf, from covering several administrations. You know, Jimmy Carter, when he first took office, he didn't let them play Hail to the Chief when he entered the room, as they do for every president. He didn't like that. He didn't feel that it fit with his image as this man of the people that he wanted to keep and maintain when he came into the White House, that he was just like everyone else. He was someone who carried his own bags when he got on Marine One. Obviously, you know, as reporters stand there and watch the president get on Marine One, he doesn't carry his own bags. It's typically an aide and a bodyguard who does that. But President Carter felt that it was important to carry his own bags as he got on Marine One for that very purpose. You know, he later said, decades after leaving the office, that he regretted not playing Hail to the Chief initially because he realized how important moments like this are to the American people, that it's not all just pomp and circumstance and flourish, that it actually does resonate with the American people in a real way. And I just thought it was always interesting to hear his reflections on the presidency and what he learned from that.
And they're making their way to the Capitol Rotunda, where the body will lie in state, Jamie, and there will be a formal program that's about to begin as well. And we'll be hearing from the Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris of the United States. There will be eulogies that will be delivered, and I presume in great tribute to the 39th President.
Absolutely. He'll be lying in state starting tonight through tomorrow, then the funeral at the National Cathedral on Thursday. I just want to point out for people who may not know Washington, D.C. geography, that's a long walk from where his family's coming from, where the Naval Memorial is, and we can hear it actually in the background now as they're getting closer. We can see there are a lot of people standing on the steps over there waiting to greet the casket and his family. We can't quite tell yet who's standing there. I know when former President Bush, 41, died, there were members of his cabinet who were there to greet him. One of the things about Jimmy Carter at 100 years old, he has outlived really most of his cabinet, many of his staff. I mean, Stuart Eisenstadt and Jim Fallows are with us, but Hamilton Jordan, Jody Powell, so many of the cabinet members have predeceased him. But I believe the lying in state will start at about 8:30 this evening and go till late tonight and then tomorrow as well.
And I think it's a
Correction,
little earlier.
7 p.m.
7
7 p.m.
Lying in state people will be able to come up here to Capitol Hill and honor the 39th president.
Well, and several of the Supreme Court justices are already actually have arrived. We've already started to see that they'll get they obviously get an earlier access to see him lying in state as he's initially brought here after this lengthy walk that Jamie just noted here for this procession. I mean, people have already started to gather. Well, we can see we're on the opposite entrance of where the actual procession will come into the Capitol based on what it looks like from here, but we can see them preparing. They're already waiting outside for his arrival to happen. We saw buses of the diplomatic corps coming in earlier to arrive. So you can see just everyone who is coming in and preparing. And Wolf, as we were talking a few moments ago about the parallels and the very stark contrast of the Trump presidency we saw and a Carter presidency, we will see all of the current living presidents gathered here in Washington 48 hours from now for the official funeral of Jimmy Carter here in Washington.
At the National Cathedral.
And that will be a moment in and of itself to see all of them gathered. Obviously, that's not always something that President-elect Trump has come to. And so to see that moment and them gathered here for Jimmy Carter.
And that'll be Thursday morning. We'll, of course, have live coverage of that as well. Manu Raju, our chief congressional correspondent, is up here on Capitol Hill. Manu, tell us exactly where you are and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm on the East Front Plaza of the Capitol, where we do expect Jimmy Carter and his motorcade to come right behind me. And then after he arrives, just in a matter of minutes here, his casket will be pulled out by the military honor guard. They'll walk up the center steps of the Capitol directly into the rotunda. He'll be greeted with members of Congress from both sides of the aisle who will be on the center steps of the Capitol, along with Carter family members. Then the casket will be put on a black structure that has actually been used since Abraham Lincoln was lying in state in the Capitol back in the late 1800s, been used for many important services like this one. And then when this ceremony begins, we expect to hear from the Republican leaders of Congress who will be eulogizing Jimmy Carter, and John Thune, the new Senate Republican leader, as well as House Speaker Mike Johnson, will be among the people who are eulogizing him, along with Vice President Kamala Harris. And we do expect a lot of bipartisan accolades to be showered over Jimmy Carter and his service. John Thune, for one, earlier this morning talked about his humble upbringing, talked about Jimmy Carter's work while in office, some of his achievements that he secured, as well as his work after he left office with the Habitat of the Humanity and the Carter Center and the like. So expect a lot of bipartisan praise. Bipartisan as well in attendance. Caitlin mentioned, I saw the Chief of Staff of the United States Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts, just walk in moments ago, along with a couple of other justices, Justice Elena Kagan and Brett Kavanaugh. So expect people from both sides of the aisle, Wolf, to honor Jimmy Carter's life and service.
A beautiful honor that's about to begin and will continue for a while. We'll have extensive coverage. And Mano, stick around. Don't go too far away. To all of our viewers, stay with us for the ceremonies once the Carter funeral procession arrives up here at the U.S. Capitol, including eulogies delivered by the Vice President Kamala Harris and top congressional leaders from both parties. And we'll be right back.
The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper, Sunday at 8 on CNN.
You'll be back! Emus can't help people customize and save with Liberty Mutual.
will I be?
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Sore throat got your tongue?
Mucinex Insta-Sue Sore Throat Medicated Drops. Uniquely formulated for rapid relief that lasts and lasts.
That's my baby!
Try our new sugar-free cough drop. Insta-Soothe!
At DriveTime.com, we've been hard at work. And we finally did it.
Did you make it so I can finally see my real payments and shop for thousands of cars with no hit to my credit?
Wait. Yes!
Shop for cars online with no credit hit. Yeah! Go to DriveTime.com and get approved with no credit hit.
It's time to feed the dogs real food in the right amount. A healthy weight can help dogs live a longer, happier life. The Farmer's Dog makes weight management easy with fresh food pre-portioned for your dog's needs. It's an idea whose time has come.
Asthma. Does it have you missing out on what you love with who you love? It's time to get back out there with Fasenra. Fasenra is an add-on treatment for eosinophilic asthma that is taken once every 8 weeks and can also be taken conveniently at home. Fasenra helps prevent asthma attacks. Most patients did not have an attack in the first year. Fasenra is proven to help you breathe better so you can get back to doing day-to-day activities. Fasenra is not for sudden breathing problems. Serious allergic reactions may occur. Get help for swelling of your face, mouth, tongue, or trouble breathing. Don't stop asthma treatments without talking with your doctor. Tell your doctor if your asthma worsens or you have a parasitic infection. Headache and sore throat may occur. Get back to better breathing. Get back to what you've missed. Ask your doctor about Fasenra, the only asthma treatment taken once every 8 weeks. If you can't afford your medication, AstraZeneca may be able to help.
Your business needs to hire someone now. So, in addition to managing your business, you have to go through hundreds of resumes and hope for the best. Or you can go and get the best. Introducing Paychex Recruiting Copilot. It uses AI to help find potential candidates from millions of profiles, whether they're looking for a job or not. Then, it helps you get in touch and get them hired. 5 times faster than job postings. Get your own Paychex Recruiting Copilot now at paychex.com/TV.
Rory never thought she would live out her dream. Then one day, she did. You were made to chase your passions. We were made to put them in a package.
This is a keepsake frame.
This is a keepsake frame.
This is our keepsake gallery wall.
Not bad, right?
The Keepsake Frames app makes it so easy to frame your favorite photos.
You just download the app,
Choose a photo, pick a frame.
and after a few days, it's at your doorstep, ready to hang. It's so
Click,
easy.
click, order. Wow.
Nice. It's perfect.
It was our 6-month anniversary.
My dog's first day at the beach.
We wanted to
That's
capture
part of
that
it.
moment.
If you have a photo you want framed, you gotta check out the Keepsake app.
It's actually really fun.
It's a lot to be a caregiver and a daughter because you kind of have to take a step back. Getting some help would be a great relief.
From companions to helpers to caregivers. Find all the senior care you need at care.com.
Closed captioning brought to you by Mesobook.com.
If you or a loved one have mesothelioma, we'll send you a free book to answer questions you may have. Call now and we'll come to you.
800-821-4000.
The funeral procession with Jimmy Carter's flag-draped casket is approaching the U.S. Capitol right now. Washington insiders, governors from around the country, a bipartisan group of people gathered, as well as American citizens, to pay tribute to the late president who prided himself as an outsider. We are watching this procession on an absolutely, just the light of this time of day and the winter, a beautiful light to watch this casket on that caisson horse-drawn carriage approach the Capitol. Kai Bird, in your years, biographer of Carter, approaching this Capitol, not a place that he loved in terms of his dealings with Capitol Hill. I was reading Peter Baker's great piece in the New York Times today. He had spoken to you, and you were saying, you know, he was an outsider, Jimmy Carter, ran against the establishment. When he gets into the Oval Office, you note he declined more than one dinner invitation from the Georgetown set. Peter talks about how he didn't want to have dinner in the home of the publisher of the Washington Post, Katharine Graham. Who knows what he'd think about that now? But that really defined him. That sort of
I don't know, is disdain the word that you would use for the set of pomp and circumstance of Washington?
He just didn't enjoy Washington cocktail parties. You know, he was, when I was interviewing him, he was in his 90s, he was still working. He was still relentless, and he was focused on the future, on his work. And so when he arrived in Washington, he disdained the sort of social butterflies of the Georgetown set. And yeah, he got numerous invitations from Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, and he turned them down. Now, he admitted later to me that this was probably a mistake, that he realized you have to groom and cultivate the Washington establishment, but he really had a disdain for that whole scene. He would much prefer to have pizza and beer with Hamilton Jordan and his press secretary, Jody Powell.
Yeah. All right, let's send it back to Wolf at the Capitol, where, of course, that procession is heading right now, Wolf, to where you are, down those old streets of Washington.
And we hear from where we're sitting here up on Capitol Hill, we can already hear the procession coming, the music in the background. It's always so moving to hear that military band play these very, very moving renditions of the traditional songs that we all love. Manu Raju, our chief congressional correspondent, is up on Capitol Hill as well. Manu, set the scene for us, what we're about to see unfold.
Yeah, we're watching right now this military band play in anticipation of Jimmy Carter's arrival here in just a matter of moments. I'm watching this procession play out right in front of my eyes, Wolf, and soon we're going to see the caisson come up down this in front of the east front of the plaza up until the center steps of the Capitol. There we will see members of the Honor Guard that are representing all 6 branches of the military will remove Jimmy Carter's casket from the caisson and walk directly up the steps of the Capitol. In just a matter of minutes, too, watch for the leaders of both parties to line the steps of the Capitol, too, to greet Jimmy Carter as he arrives here for this memorial service. But right now, Wolf, just a very moving tribute we are seeing here, a solemn moment as members of the military wait here, march in unison, and wait for Jimmy Carter's arrival here in just a matter of moments, Wolf.
And we're going to be hearing more military music coming along, including God of Our Fathers and Oh God, Our Help in Ages Past, the U.S. Army Band, the Pershing Zone, as it's called. It will be playing Jamie. We're watching this unfold, and we're not very far away from this. It's so powerful, so moving for all of us who are actually nearby.
We can see actually pulling up right in over your shoulder, Wolf. His grandchildren, 11, I believe, of his grandchildren will be the honorary pallbearers. But, you know, we were just listening to Kai Bird, who wrote this extraordinary biography of Jimmy Carter, talking about how Carter really didn't like Capitol Hill, and Capitol Hill didn't like him. I think it was said that Jimmy Carter really didn't like politics or politicians. Tip O'Neill wrote in his biography that Jimmy Carter and his group, they were amateurs who came to Washington with a chip on their shoulder. So this was something that, you know, in later years, Carter realized that he did need to schmooze and get to know people, but it wasn't something he liked to do. One of his staffers had convinced him to invite some members of Congress over to play tennis one day. And when the tennis game was done, Jimmy Carter sort of curtly said goodbye and went back to work. And the staffer was saying, no, you should have invited them in for a drink, that this is a town of relationships. But he was always his own man.
He never changed. Well, and that's, you know, the comparison of him as an outsider, Trump as an outsider. Jimmy Carter was a true outsider in the sense that he had no desire to belong, not to Washington, not even really to, you know, the pillars of his own party in Washington. It was Democrats that he also famously snubbed, as you were mentioning. But just thinking, Wolf, as, you know, he's here arriving on Capitol Hill, you see these members of Congress, senior figures waiting.
Hold on a second. Let's see. Caitlin, the remains will be escorted from the base of the Capitol Rotunda stairs all the way up, and that's where the coffin will remain. And folks will be able to come later tonight, starting later tonight, to pay their respects.
Not just members of Congress, not just Supreme Court justices, members of the public can come and wait in line and pay their respects and see President Jimmy Carter as he lies in state here for the next 2 days. It's a very special moment for people who are in Washington or visiting Washington at a time like this. There's a few dozen staffers and tourists behind us actually standing watching as all of this is unfolding, what we're seeing on the right side of the screen. We have an eagle's eye vantage point from where we're sitting, Wolf. But just as he's entering the halls of Congress, Wolf, when
you can see the rotunda now on the left part of the screen.
And when Jimmy Carter took office, he had big legislative goals. He had a lot he wanted to get done. He had this famous whiteboard in the Oval Office with every different legislative achievement that he wanted to get done. All of these different major policies. Typically a president entering office would pick one or two big ones they wanted to tackle. He wanted to go after all of them. And he was, someone who, as governor of Georgia, read every bill from beginning to end. He was very tedious and took the time to look at everything. He didn't famously like to delegate very much. He was even criticized at one point for wanting to introduce too much legislation in the White House. And that goes back to what Jamie was saying about the importance, obviously, of fostering those relationships whenever he took office with key members on Capitol Hill that he just didn't famously see the need for or the desire to kind of have that horse trading, handshake kind of relationship with them. It didn't mean he didn't have legislative dreams. He had a lot of them, actually, and wanted to get a lot accomplished. And that's famously why, part of when he lost, they had felt like they were just catching their stride in terms of figuring out how Washington works and getting everything underway when, of course, he lost his reelection. And so to see him returning to the halls of Congress here, where he will be honored by our senior congressional figures today, a look back at that moment in his presidency as well.
Yeah, it's a chilly day indeed here in Washington. Maybe even worse than chilly. It's very, very cold here in Washington today. But these folks are walking. They're escorting the coffin. They'll be going up the Capitol Rotunda stairs. And they'll make their way indoors, and then there will be a formal program that will beginning with the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. Jamie.
Also, I believe speaking will be Vice President Kamala
Yes,
Harris
she
will
will.
speak. I think Speaker Mike Johnson and other leaders will speak.
The new majority leader of the Senate, John Thune, will speak as well.
Will be speaking. I think that just to go back to what Caitlin was saying about his time in Washington and his aggressive agenda, he did get a lot accomplished, but he didn't do it the easy way. He got it through, but it wasn't always easy. And
these are the family members who are coming, the pallbearers, honorary pallbearers, and others who will be special guests inside at this ceremony.
Who are the Carter grandchildren are the pallbearers that are going to be here. Obviously, family was such a big part of Jimmy Carter and Rosalind's life long after they left Washington, and has continued to be a mainstay for them. And it also just goes back to Jimmy Carter and Rosalind themselves and their relationship when he was in office and how close they were. And they had a weekly lunch, Wolf, that it wasn't a wife and husband lunch, it was a policy lunch that Jimmy Carter and Rosalind had, where they would sit down and talk about big issues that were important to her or important to him. She played a key role in so much of that. She actually would come to his cabinet meetings and sit alongside the wall at times and listen in and weigh in, obviously, later in on their conversations. That was so rare. I don't know if ever a presidential spouse had come into the cabinet meetings before.
It really was groundbreaking in this way. It's not that First Ladies did not have an influence behind the scenes, but it was a very public, image of her influence that she would actually come and sit in.
Yeah, and she wanted equal pay for his staff, and they became much more influential under Rosalind Carter. She was out in the public as well. She went out with Dale Bumper's wife of Arkansas to push for childhood vaccinations and making them mandatory in schools. That was a huge effort of hers that she did. I mean, she was such a partner to him, obviously, that it doesn't even need to be said because it's just their relationship and their dynamic was so clear. But to see their family here surrounding for such a special moment, Wolf, obviously.
77 years of a marriage. That's pretty amazing. 77 years for Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, and he's being honored now, and you can see they're getting ready for that. Once the actual program begins, Jamie, the U.S. Naval Academy Glee Club will be performing. I'm really looking forward to hearing My Country 'Tis of Thee, and then later they'll be performing Eternal Father, Strong to Save, which is the U.S. Navy hymn. And of course, as we all know, Jimmy Carter went to the Naval Academy, graduated from the Naval Academy. It was one of his pride events.
Yeah, that was initially what he sought. He wanted a lifelong career in the Navy, and didn't really have Washington on his vision board necessarily until, of course, when he was trying to be an engineering officer. His father passed away unexpectedly in 1953, and he returned home to Plains to run the family farm, and that is what positioned him for politics and eventually the presidency. And Wolf, to think of when President Carter was here in office, and Joe Biden, and he had a relationship as well. And Joe Biden once was quoted as saying he didn't know if it was worse to be his enemy or his friend. And it just spoke to that relationship that they had. And obviously we'll see that come full circle on Thursday at the National Cathedral, Wolf, when President Biden eulogizes President Carter.
Yes, we'll be covering that, of course, as well. We're about to hear Hail to the Chief once again as this procession continues.
So funny because he hated having it played when he first took office. He later relented and let them play it in his later years in office. But initially, he did not want them playing "Hail to the Chief." He didn't like it. He didn't like the pomp and the circumstance. And obviously, we're seeing that come to light today, and how he later said he understood why it was so important to Americans. But Jimmy Carter did not want "Hail to the Chief" played as he entered the room, and that just spoke to how he viewed the role the president should have. And
this will be very, very moving as they take the coffin and they go up the Capitol Rotunda stairs to the rotunda where the body will lie in state. This is a special moment indeed that we're about to see, Jamie.
So I think what we're seeing there from the back would be his grandchildren, who will be the honorary pallbearers as the military actually will move the casket up the stairs. I'm also told that waiting either at the top of the steps or waiting in the rotunda are members of his administration, former cabinet members. I believe Joseph Califano is going to be there. One other thing I think we should remember that was very, very difficult for Jimmy Carter was the hostage crisis. And
when American diplomats and others were taken hostage in Iran and held for 442 days. You can see the family beginning to go inside right now. They'll be waiting at the top of the rotunda for the coffin to actually arrive. But go ahead.
It really did have such an impact on so much of his presidency. And in the end, the hostages were released. But there was this bittersweet moment because Iran did not release the hostages until after President Reagan was inaugurated. They didn't want it to happen on Jimmy Carter's watch.
And people don't necessarily remember or weren't around during those 442 days of the hostage crisis. Every night, Ted Koppel on Nightline would have day 30, day 40. But let's listen in right now. This is a moving moment.
Yeah.
Jamie, as we're waiting for them to remove the casket and begin the process going up those Capitol Rotunda stairs, finish your thought, what you wanted to say about the hostages. We're going through another hostage crisis right now as well, but this was way back when American diplomats and others were taken hostage by Iranians in Tehran and held hostage for 442 days.
It really did overwhelm that part of his presidency at the end, and was part of the reason probably that he lost to Ronald Reagan. I think what we're seeing here right now is that they're preparing the casket to be carried up the steps of the Capitol, Wolf. If we just want to watch the moment.
Yeah, they'll be removing the casket momentarily and beginning the process of going up those Capitol Rotunda stairs into the Capitol Rotunda, where the body will lie in state and where this program will actually take place very, very soon. And I'm just looking at the rundown for the program. Caitlin, very, very moving. Not just the military bands, but the eulogies and the actual service that will take place.
Well, and you're also just seeing today the culmination of these places that were so formative to Jimmy Carter's life, from Plains, Georgia, to Annapolis, Maryland, to here in Washington, D.C., and his time at the United States Naval Academy, where he was from 1943 to 1946. This moment for him to leave Georgia, to leave the South, and he talked about later how that shaped him in life, leaving the family farm and having that moment and that experience. Same for Rosalind, who obviously grew up right nearby him. His mom was actually the midwife when she was born, and he was just a baby at the time. But then obviously his time here in Washington, and just seeing, those moments that shaped someone who left the office at a relatively young age when we look at it now, and went on to have those decades of service and life afterward, and to have so much of his family from Plains here.
To talk about public service and Jimmy Carter, I was speaking to one of his former Secret Service agents, and they told me a story that was actually quite recent. They were at church with former President Carter, and he looked up at his Secret Service agent, someone who had been with him for a while, and he said to the agent, "I hope I've done enough." This is at the very end of his life. Yeah. And the Secret Service agent said to him, "You have, sir." But that was so important in everything he did.
And we see all the American flags, indeed all the flags, the state flags, other flags around the U.S. Capitol at half-staff in honor of the 39th President of the United States. Aaron, go ahead. I know you're going to pick up our coverage.
Yes, and as we're, I know obviously the caisson and the procession moving to where you are, Wolf, we are going to be hearing in just a few moments, Audie, when this today's service begins. The chaplain of the U.S. Senate will speak. We are going to hear from Senator John Thune, Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate. We're going to hear from Speaker Mike Johnson. They're going to talk about Jimmy Carter in this somber moment that is going to be very bipartisan, but also in the context of Trump. Who obviously he has said, he's been talking about the Panama Canal, he has made his comments. What do they say in this moment?
Well, I think that ideally, and we talked about this, I think during the break, is you have some moments that are above partisan politics. And I think this would really showcase that if that's what we see, because Carter had been a punchline for so many Republican politicians for so long and continued to be, as they talked about Joe Biden. So expecting them to hear talking about him and really giving him the honor that is due as president, not just as what I would call global citizen.
I mean, it is, Kate, obviously the context here is the harsh words that Jimmy Carter had in his final years for Trump. A no love lost there, although in recent days, Trump has been gracious, of course. He is going to be attending the funeral. But when you speak in these moments, and you are John Thune or you are Mike Johnson, you also have that audience of one.
Oh, I mean, they have to be, I think, incredibly respectful in these remarks. And I think we've been talking a bit about how President Carter eschewed, a lot of the formalities and the pomp and circumstance. But I think he wanted people to be watching this. He wanted to get this respect that he felt he didn't always get as a one-term president. I know Rosalind said it was the biggest regret of her life that he wasn't reelected. And so I think that these politicians that are speaking today should really go out of their way to try to bring the country together in this moment, in this rare moment where there's so much division. Mike Johnson, I think can easily, there's so many things to choose from to praise Jimmy Carter about that are not purely political.
And you talk about how he eschewed so much of the pomp and circumstance, and yet he wanted people to watch this, that he felt acutely that only being a one-term president and how he was judged for that. The actual formal ways in which we are seeing that in these moments here, that caisson as we are watching it approach the Capitol, Tim, you have talked about when Carter planned this funeral, and he did plan this funeral, that LBJ was the last person to have had his hearse transferred by a caisson. It was not what was done. And then subsequent to that, only Reagan. Ford chose not to. H.W. Bush chose not to. Carter actually chose the pomp and circumstance here.
Yes, and I think it's important to keep in mind that this is the first time in over 20 years that Washington and us and those outside of Washington have seen this procession with a caisson. As you mentioned, both Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush decided they did not want this pomp and circumstance. And we can speculate as to why President Carter did, but I think there are two reasons. One, as Kate mentioned, as Kai mentioned, I think that though he didn't like things like Hail to the Chief because it made him think of the imperial presidency, it made him think of Richard Nixon. This is something that this particular ritual started with Abraham Lincoln, and then for Jimmy Carter, searingly, it's associated with JFK. And so I think for him, this is part of how a country remembers a fallen commander-in-chief. And number two, as we watch the procession, for those of us old enough to remember watching Jimmy Carter's inauguration, it in many ways evoked that inauguration. Had he gone to the laying in state in a hearse, it would have been over in minutes. Instead, we watched a slow procession exactly as it was in 1977. Carter, in a sense, is returning to that moment of possibility in the case of his presidency, and in this case, evoking the best part of his presidency.
And we did hear also, you talk about the caisson, we did hear Hail to the Chief. He also chose that for the Naval Memorial.
I think Rosalind, and Kate may know this, I believe it's Rosalind Carter, who said to him, "You've got to have that. You can't strip this office of all."
Did. So smart. She was a better politician than he was in many ways.
And the other thing is,
loved campaigning.
He used to carry his suitcases when he would come off of Air Force One. He stopped doing that. He recognized that many Americans still wanted their president to be larger than life, and that was stripping it too close to the bone. So he was trying to find that balance after Richard Nixon's imperial presidency, and wasn't easy to do.
We are in these final moments waiting, and obviously they're running a few moments behind, but that casket will be brought in to lie in state in the Capitol, and this service will begin, where we will hear from the Vice President, the Majority Leader, the House Speaker. Kai, it obviously, if you had gone by hearse, this would have happened in just a few moments. Part of the choice of a caisson, and Carter would have, of course, been very aware of this, was to give time, to have time to think, time to consider, time for people to watch time to discuss.
Yes, absolutely. I think Jimmy had a respect for tradition. He disliked pomp. He disliked the imperial presidency, but I think you're right, Tim. This caisson journey is reminiscent of Lincoln. And as a Southern man, he's very much aware of that history. He's very much aware that the South was defeated and occupied, and that there are limits to America's power. Also, I think it's important to remember that it was Jimmy Carter who brought the Resolute desk out of the warehouses from the archives and put it in the Oval Office. The desk that John F. Kennedy had used. And it is the desk that has been used by every president since. So there's a real evidence that he had a respect for tradition, and so I'm not surprised by the case.
There's a great quote from his inauguration where he quotes his teacher from Plains, Julia Coleman, who he quoted quite often. And he said, "You must accommodate changing times, but cling to unchanging principles." And those unchanging principles are honesty, things that we don't see much in our politics today. So I think this is a moment for us to be nostalgic about someone who could never win in today's America.
And there's so much of his Washington that is gone. We've spent a lot of time talking today about the ways he was rejected by Washington or was an outsider. Well, guess what? There is no big, powerful newspaper person you need to impress anymore. There is no salon you need to go to solve it all. You heard the president-elect this morning calling Mar-a-Lago the Winter White House and going into its history with Carter selling the building because it had once been held by the U.S. government. So he outlasted a lot of those rivals. Tip O'Neill. There can't be a House Speaker like Tip O'Neill anymore. There isn't an Edward Kennedy level senator anymore. So I think that things have changed so profoundly, and in the end, his legacy does speak louder than some of those opponents did at that time. I think that's sort of the most generous way I can say it, in this moment.
And Tim, that we all do, and maybe Kate, you're using the word nostalgic, but we all do cling in a sense to the pomp and circumstance. People, we want this. This is part of what defines a moment and defines a shared experience that we all have.
Yes, and the framers debated amongst themselves about sort of the powers of this person. And there were some that said, we don't want a king. But then they found that some in America wanted an elected king. They wanted someone bigger and bolder than us. So but we are contradictory as Americans. Sometimes we want a president we can have beer with. And sometimes we want a president that's aloof and that we can look at and say, and someday she's the best of us.
Yep.
We're not sure of it. One thing we know for sure is that we don't want our president to be a source of embarrassment, because the president is our bald eagle. And so there's this incredible balance that must be struck. And Jimmy Carter was very interesting because he tried to strike the balance, not always successfully, and then Ronald Reagan comes in and has a totally different model.
Oh, right, with the stardom and that charisma. All right, Jake, let's send it to you as we await, of course, the hearse to be brought into the Capitol for the ceremony.
That's right, and we'll keep an eye on that. And the moment it happens, we'll start talking about that. They are waiting right now for any number of logistical issues to come into place. I do want to touch base, just because it's so seldom that we have actual witnesses to history sitting at the panel to talk about things that others in our political world are discussing. I do want to talk about the Panama Canal. Here's the family of Jimmy Carter walking out right now. They are, is this the pallbearers, I believe, or just at least members of the family walking in? And this is as we've discussed with Anita McBride earlier, this is the east side of the Capitol, where President Carter wanted to be brought in. Is there a significance to the fact that he wanted the east side? Because you talked about Reagan wanted the west side because it faces California. And Gerald Ford wanted to walk through the House chamber because he had been a minority leader of the House.
There is some symbolism of where they're brought in, but also let's remember too, the west front, it's totally under construction now, or preparation for the inauguration, and that might be the real reason why he's coming up the East Plaza rather than the west.
I do want to talk about Panama, but one other thing I want to talk about to our experts here from the Carter White House is his friendship with the man he defeated. And I mentioned earlier how, well, it's been mentioned Jimmy Carter at the age of 100 outlived almost everybody. He outlived his vice president, whose son, Ted Mondale, is going to be reading the eulogy. And he outlived the man he defeated and became good friends with, Gerald Ford, whose son, Stephen, is going to read the eulogy to Gerald Ford.
So there's a beautiful story about this. They fought a very bitter presidential campaign. It was decided by half of 1%. And they went to Golda Meir's funeral together on what was an Air Force One, and for 12 hours sat next to each other. And they really bonded. Now, interestingly, Ford told me that Nixon was on the other side of the aisle, and for that whole 12 hours never said a word. But they bonded, and they went to each other's libraries, and they committed themselves to give eulogies at each other's funeral. And then I got Jim Cannon, who was Ford's domestic advisor, and we created in 1988 a bipartisan commission that they both chaired to give advice to whoever won in 1988, which was George H.W. Bush. We went once to Atlanta, we went to Beaver Creek. It was beautiful to see, Jake, the relationship they had.
Amazing, and we'll come back to that in a second. We're expecting the 21-gun salute to start any second. Let's listen. Family of President Carter is coming out now. There's his son Chip is coming out with his brood. Other members, Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, had 4 children. All of them are with us today, and all of them are at the Capitol. And there are a total of 22 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Chip Carter giving the eulogy at the memorial over the weekend. His son Jack, Jimmy Carter's son Jack, is there. Obviously, when you live to be 100, your sons and daughters may be in their 60s and 70s when they come to your funeral. Jeff Carter is there, the president's adult son. Amy Carter, the president's adult daughter, who famously went to public school when she came here as a child in grade school, when the Carters moved to Washington in 1977. We are waiting for the casket containing former President Carter to enter the Capitol Rotunda, where he will lie in state and be honored by well-wishers, both official and unofficial from the public. We have seen a couple surviving members of the Carter cabinet while we have been watching the proceedings. We saw the former Treasury Secretary, Michael Blumenthal, and the former Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary, that was the name of the office at the time, Joseph Califano. That is where his casket will lie in state. We've seen a number of these proceedings over the last 20 years. There is the former Speaker. There are Supreme Court Justices Kavanaugh and Kagan, as well as the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts. You see the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, there behind them. And now members of the Carter family are walking into the rotunda to honor their father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Stu Eisenstadt, while you're here, what is going through your mind as somebody who worked for President Carter? I mean, you obviously knew this day would come sometime.
I mean, what goes through that mind is he taught us how to live a life of purpose, a life of faith, and he taught us how, I think, to die at peace with himself. But it also is important that we not only look at his post-presidency, but that we recognize that he was, to my mind, one of the most effective and successful presidents for one term. He accomplished so much domestically and in foreign affairs, which have lasted, whether it's the Panama Canal, the Middle East peace process. So much that he did really is still here. The China normalization, the collapse of the Soviet Union was due in part to his soft power of using human rights, but also he was the one that reversed the post-Vietnam defense decline and all the weapon systems which President Reagan put in power, he started them. So I think it's a legacy that needs to be looked at. It's time to redeem his presidency.
Jim Fallows, you, as his chief speechwriter, obviously, you knew this day would come. I don't know if you knew that he was going to live to be 100. But what's going through your mind as we see the bipartisan nature of the memorials to him as we see this field of U.S. senators, Democrats and Republicans, is something that has struck me since his death. An outpouring on social media of not just President Bush, et cetera, not just President Trump, but far right-wing commentators talking about how Jimmy Carter, while they disagreed with him, was a man who lived a purposeful life, a man of deep faith. Really striking.
I think I remember on the campaign trail, as Stu Eisenstadt must, his 52nd birthday, just before he first won the presidency. I thought, how can anybody be that old? And so to have all these decades ahead of him in which he was able to show what specifically the way he could use the influence of being the former president of the United States for good around the world, and also to be true to your faith.
There's the Vice President of the United States and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, Kamala Harris, and also the newly reelected Speaker, Mike Johnson of Louisiana. Again, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jim, just to say that, but like it really has been remarkable how much people have come together. You know, he obviously has made statements and enacted policies that people disagree with, but it really has been an American moment.
It is true, and one thing I've been saying, so Jimmy Carter had the fortune of going into hospice almost 2 years ago and being able to see all these appreciations while he could still read them and hear them. And people, I think, have spent these past 2 years trying to assess what he meant in office, all the things he accomplished that were undernosed at the time, and the things that he has achieved and stood for, from Habitat to Humanity to the guinea worm to winning the Nobel Peace Prize.
And as we look at Vice President Harris, who's going to speak momentarily, we remember that one of President Carter's grandchildren said that he wanted to stay alive long enough to vote for her for president, which he did.
And they are about to bring out the casket and place it on what is called the Lincoln Catafalque, which is a platform constructed in 1865 to support the casket of Abraham Lincoln. Let's listen.
Let us pray. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arms have bound the restless waves, we thank you for the inspiration of a consequential and laudable life as we celebrate the legacy of James Earl Carter, Jr., the 39th President of the United States. We proclaim your generosity to this nation and world for giving us the gift of someone with the ethical congruence to be salt and light to his generation. Lord, he made the world more palatable. We thank you for his passion for integrity, his commitment to leave the world better than he found it, and his exemplary love for his precious Rosalind. Inspired by his great life, teach us to know you more clearly, to love you more dearly, and to follow you more nearly each day. We pray in your matchless name. Amen.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Speaker, Leader Schumer, Leader Jeffries, Jack, Chip, Jeff, Amy, and other members of the Carter family, and distinguished guests. Today we gather to begin a final farewell to Jimmy Carter, Navy veteran, peanut farmer, Governor of Georgia, and President of the United States. Sunday school teacher, Nobel Prize winner, advocate for peace and human rights, and first and foremost, a faithful servant of his Creator and his fellow man. In a commencement speech he delivered at Liberty University back in 2018, President Carter told a story about going on a mission to Massachusetts back in his younger days under the auspices of the Southern Baptist Convention. During that trip, President Carter was impressed by the success of a fellow missionary in winning souls to Christ. And so as the mission was winding down, he asked him what made him so successful. He was a little embarrassed by my question, President Carter recalled, but then he finally said, I try to have two loves in my heart. One love is for God, and the other love I have in my heart is for the person who happens to be in front of me at any particular time. It was a statement, President Carter said, that he never forgot. I think it's fair to say that it's also a statement he lived by. President Carter's term as president ended in 1981. And for the remainder of his life, the longest post-presidency of any American president ever, he focused on making the lives of his fellow men better. That meant things like the Carter Center, which, among other things, works for the eradication of disease in some of the poorest areas of the globe. And it meant things like his work with Habitat for Humanity to provide affordable housing for those in need. And when I say his work with Habitat for Humanity, I do mean his work. Jimmy Carter knew that his status as a former president could bring attention to good causes. It's why he encouraged Habitat to make use of his name and image. But simply lending his name, or maybe attending a gala or two, wasn't Jimmy Carter's style. He was here to get down in the weeds and the dirt And he did that literally on numerous habitat builds, including one back in 1994 in Eagle Butte in my home state of South Dakota. Well into his 90s, he could be found with his hard hat and tools on construction sites doing the practical work required to get families into homes. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And Jimmy Carter did his very best to live according to the calling of his Lord and Savior. Today, I join all Americans in mourning President Carter and remembering his example. But I rejoice in the thought that he, together with his beloved wife, Rosalind, is now before the face of his Father.
To the family, to Jack and Chip and Jeff and Amy, the entire Carter family, Vice President Harris, members of the Cabinet, Leader Thune, my colleagues in Congress, and my fellow citizens. We meet in this sacred hall of self-government to honor an extraordinary man, a man who modeled the virtues of service and citizenship, as well as any other American. Surrounding us are the statues of those who gave their time, their energy, and their lives for the good of America. Before us lays a man who now joins their midst as a patriot, a veteran, a humanitarian, and the 39th President of the United States. When Jimmy Carter walked out on the east front of the Capitol and took his oath of office, I was just 4 years old, and he's the first president that I remember. Looking back, it's obvious now to me as an adult why he captured everyone's attention. Jimmy Carter was a member of the greatest generation. He lived through the Great Depression. He did that on a farm in rural Georgia. He knew the value of a dollar, and he modeled thrift his entire life. As long as he was in office, he hated government waste. His father, an Army veteran of the World War I era, taught patriotism to his children. And eventually his son, this young man from Plains, followed his father's example of self-sacrifice, and he joined the Naval Academy in the middle of World War II. In the Army, Lieutenant Carter learned from the legendary Admiral Rickover to always do his best as he served on the first fleet of nuclear submarines. It's telling that today the USS Jimmy Carter, a top-secret attack submarine, now roams the oceans, bearing the name of the only president who served in such close quarters. President Carter's life, his selfless service, his fight against cancer, and his lasting contributions to his fellow man are all truly remarkable. Whether he was in the White House or in his post-presidential years, as was discussed, President Carter was willing to roll up his own sleeves to serve and get the job done. We all know about his work with Habitat for Humanity, and that was mentioned. And the origin story goes that it was in 1984, when he first became aware of the work. He was in New York for a friend's anniversary. Millard Fuller, the founder of the fledgling charity at the time, called President Carter and asked if he wanted to visit a site in Brooklyn during his trip. President Carter agreed, and he found his way down to the Lower East Side. Standing on the roof of a dilapidated building, he looked out on the wealth of Wall Street to the south and to the power of Midtown Manhattan to the north. And then he looked down and he saw an image he'd never forget. An elderly woman cooking breakfast over an open fire in the rubble of the building, there in the heart of the richest city in the world. The Habitat for Humanity worker that was there with him turned to President Carter and said, if there's anything that you can do, we would take it. He said, if there's anything I can do, let me know. The worker said, well, maybe you can send some volunteer carpenters from your church. It was the very next day that President Carter called Habitat for Humanity and told them he was going to send some carpenters, all right, and that he himself would be one of them. And thus began his famous tradition of donating 1 week every year to build and restore homes for his fellow Americans. It's remarkable to think that one of the 45 men who has served as president and one of the only 13 who held the role in the nuclear age would humble himself to such service. We all know that his care for humanity didn't stop at building homes. In the face of illness, President Jimmy Carter brought life-saving medicine. In the face of conflict, he brokered peace. In the face of discrimination, he reminded us that we are all made in the image of God. And if you were to ask him why he did it all, he would likely point to his faith. I'm reminded of his admonition to, quote, live our lives as though Christ were coming this afternoon, and of his amazing personal reflection. Quote, if I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. We all agree that he certainly did. So today in these hallowed halls of our republic, we honor President Carter, his family, and his enduring legacy that he leaves, not only upon this nation, but upon the world.
Leader Thune, Speaker Johnson, Leader Schumer, Leader Jeffries, members of Congress, and distinguished guests. It is an honor to be with you this afternoon, and to Jack, Chip, Jeff, Amy, and Jason, and all the other members of the Carter family. On behalf of the American people, Doug and I offer our deepest condolences. Being with you today, I'm reminded of the enduring words of a favorite hymn. May the works I have done speak for me. Today we gather to celebrate the life of a man whose works will echo for generations to come. A man from Plains, Georgia, who grew up without electricity or running water and served as the 39th President of the United States of America, and lived every day of his long life in service to the people. President James Earl Carter, Jr. So I was in middle school when Jimmy Carter was elected president, and I vividly recall how my mother admired him, how much she admired his strength of character, his honesty, his integrity, his work ethic and determination, his intelligence, and his generosity of spirit. We have heard much today and in recent days about President Carter's impact in the 4 decades after he left the White House. Rightly so. Jimmy Carter established a new model for what it means to be a former president, and leaves an extraordinary post-presidential legacy. From founding the Carter Center, which has helped advance global human rights and alleviate human suffering, to his public health work in Latin America and Africa, to his tireless advocacy for peace and democracy. And Jimmy Carter was the President of the United States who was ahead of his time. He was the first President of the United States to have a comprehensive energy policy, including providing some of the first federal support for clean energy. He also passed over a dozen major pieces of legislation regarding environmental protection, and more than doubled the size of America's national parks, including protecting our beloved redwoods in my home state of California. He was a president who, between the years of 1977 and 1981, appointed more Black Americans to the federal bench than all of his predecessors combined, and appointed 5 times as many women. And in the wake of Watergate, Jimmy Carter passed historic ethics legislation to help rebuild America's faith in government. Jimmy Carter, as president, was also a respected global leader. To be sure, the years of his presidency were not without international crises or challenges, but his legacy of global leadership is well established. In Asia, he instituted full diplomatic relations with China, which he would later call one of the most historically significant accomplishments of his presidency. And his legacy lives on in the Middle East because, do recall, in the decades before Jimmy Carter became president, Israel and Egypt had been at war numerous times. Few thought peace could be achieved between them. Yet Jimmy Carter did that. Through his persistence and perseverance, through his unshakable belief in the power of American diplomacy, he secured the Camp David Accords, one of the most significant and durable peace treaties since World War II. And throughout the world, Jimmy Carter elevated the role of human rights in America's foreign policy priorities and uplifted the importance of civil society in doing that work. Jimmy Carter was a forward-looking president with a vision for the future. Consider his establishment of the Department of Energy in 1977, which anticipated the central role it would play in addressing the climate crisis. His creation of FEMA in 1979, which enabled our nation to mobilize a national response to disasters, which has helped countless communities rebuild and recover. And his founding of the Department of Education later that year, which elevated public education institutions and increased national standards for the education of America's children and future leaders. Jimmy Carter was that all too rare example of a gifted man who also walks with humility, modesty, and grace. Recall the stories from the 1976 campaign about how he slept in the homes of his supporters to share a meal with them at their table and to listen to what was on their minds. How on their first trip for Habitat for Humanity, Jimmy and Rosalind rode the bus with the other volunteers. And when the group stopped for the night to stay at a local church, Jimmy and Rosalind gave their private room to a young couple who had put off their honeymoon to join the trip. And with the other volunteers, they then slept on the floor of the church basement. And then, of course, his work to eradicate the vicious guinea worm disease that once disabled millions of people a year. It was one of the Carter Center's greatest triumphs. And Jimmy Carter, of course, given his nature, attributed its success not to his own leadership, but to the thousands of everyday Africans who were on the ground doing the work. Throughout his life and career, Jimmy Carter retained a fundamental decency and humility. James Earl Carter Jr. loved our country. He lived his faith, he served the people, and he left the world better than he found it. And in the end, Jimmy Carter's work and those works speak for him, louder than any tribute we can offer. May his life be a lesson for the ages and a beacon for the future. May God bless President Jimmy Carter, and may God bless the United States of America.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my
So the leaders, Democratic and Republican of the House of Representatives, are going to lay wreaths at President Carter's casket right now. You see on the bottom right of your screen to the left, House Speaker newly reelected Mike Johnson of Louisiana, and to his right, Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Next, the Vice President of the United States, who also has a ceremonial role as the President of the U.S. Senate, will deliver a wreath. President Biden will be delivering a eulogy on Thursday at President Carter's memorial service. There she is with the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff.
Would you pray with me? Holy and loving God, receive into your eternal joy your good and faithful servant, James Earl Carter, Jr. Reward him richly and grant him your own well done for his humble and honorable life, worth far more than the many accolades and attributions we have gladly given. May President Jimmy Carter now rest from his labors and be received into the embrace of your everlasting arms. And when the ceremony and fanfare due this man of character and compassion fades into history, when the processions and parades have dispersed, leave with us, O God, the lasting impression and inspiration of a life well lived. Ignite in us the same passion for public service, the courage to champion the underserved, the strength to bear as faithfully the weight of the call to which you have called each one of us, to do as justly, to love mercy as unreservedly, to walk as humbly with you as we have witnessed in the testimony of President Jimmy Carter's life of faithfulness. We offer our prayers in the name of the one whom Jimmy Carter would have known to be the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega, his rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
All right, so that is, it looks like, the end of the proceeding for the day. The president's grown children are approaching their father's casket. There we see Chip and Jack and Jeff. Amy Carter was there earlier. I don't see her right. Oh, there she is right there. Amy Carter in front there, looking at their father's casket. In about an hour or so after the dignitaries in the Capitol Rotunda have had their opportunity to pay their respects to the 39th president, it will be open to the public, to members of the public, who will be able to pay their respect to. And I can't think of anything more fitting, and knowing the little I know about Jimmy Carter compared to the august individuals on my panel, that probably Jim Fallows, former head speechwriter for President Carter, that probably would mean more to him wherever he is.
Indeed. And about what we just heard, I would like to make a secular point connected to a spiritual point.
Please do.
The secular point is, most of us in the business of storytelling, we know that people understand the world through stories. And the time when we've had so many stories of people doing the convenient thing, the short-sighted thing, the weak thing, to have the story of this man's life is really important. I think we heard that was part of what Vice President Harris was talking about. The secular point is, we know that Jimmy Carter was a man of profound faith with his Christian faith. It's underappreciated how he was a man of all faiths. He tried always to address Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and all the rest. I think probably what he would have chosen for this moment is the Jewish sentiment, may his memory be a blessing.
Yes, Jim's point is very important. He did embrace other religions. For example, he came to our Passover Seder just 2 weeks after he had negotiated the Egypt-Israel peace treaty. It was so moving to be with the person who 2,500 years earlier, the Israelites fled from Egypt, and here he had negotiated the peace with them. And he stayed for the entire Seder. He also was the first president to light a Hanukkah menorah, the first, and he created the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
I have one actually to add to that as well. Here, this born-again Baptist was the first president to invite a pope to come to the White House in 1979, John Paul II. And we did not have diplomatic relations with the Vatican yet. That didn't happen until later, until the Reagan administration. So to your point about embracing all faiths, that's a great example.
That's really beautiful. I mean, the notion of that his faith meant so much, but John King said earlier he never pushed his faith on anybody. It was obviously important to him, but then also just the deep recognition of other faiths. Jim Fallows, as the former speechwriter, head speechwriter for Jimmy Carter, what do you think he would have made of the speeches in tribute to him today that we heard from the Republican leader John Thune, the House Speaker Mike Johnson, and of course the Vice President Kamala Harris?
I think he would have appreciated the way in which the two Republican leaders paid respect to the life he had lived, the example he set. I think he would have taken even deeper pleasure from Vice President Harris's assessment of what he did as president and the far-sighted way in which he, in the environmental realm and human rights, in appointing women and non-whites to the judiciary, the ways in which he was a pioneer. So I bet he would have had an ascending curve of, liking them more and more as they went on.
And one thing we know from the family, and I interviewed Jason Carter, his grandson, right after it happened, but he was, and he lasted much longer than this, but he was in his final year. He could not wait to vote for Kamala Harris, I'm sure not only because of her Democratic and progressive politics, but also being a woman and being an African American. He could not wait. He voted for her early via absentee ballot in Georgia, and then, hung around for 3 more months.
So, Jake, there were 8 women on the federal bench when he came into office. There were 41 when he left.
Amazing.
And just talking about the scene that we are looking at right now, we just saw members of the very, very large Carter clan coming and paying tribute to their father, grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle, but doing so surrounded by Republicans and Democrats. And look, these days we can't take this kind of scene for granted. The fact that you did have not only the vice president, who is, of course, a member of Jimmy Carter's party, someone who just reminded us that Jimmy Carter really had wanted to become president, but leaders on the Republican side of the aisle who didn't have to talk about policies or anything of that nature because they were able to talk about the man who he was, particularly in the 40-something years, almost half a century post-presidency, and the way that he lived his life.
James, I'm thinking about what you just said about the stories that really drive how we remember and understand people. And I do think that in this time since he left the presidency, it's been a time to understand him a lot better as a person. The through line of his life being somebody who wanted to make things better. And so much of the conversation politically about Jimmy Carter is often about disagreements with policy decisions that he made, and also about the fact that he was not reelected. But his motivations, I think, are important to emphasize in this moment. He was someone who started his life not aspiring to be president of the United States. And in an era in which we have so many people who spend their entire lifetimes just trying to accumulate power, it's something that I think people have a hard time understanding, and maybe some people deride him for it. But I think that is what is different about Jimmy Carter, and when you dig into his story as a person and as a human being, I think the humility of who he was as a person isn't just a trope. It actually is a real thing. I also think about the Republicans who had a lot to say today, and as I'm looking, I was looking over a lot of Jimmy Carter's legacy. It struck me that a lot of things that he supported and did, they would have supported.
Deregulation.
Deregulation.
Right.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
The deregulation.
He was a supporter of coal. He was someone who talked about reducing American dependence on foreign oil. He was a devout Christian. He did proselytize among his friends and colleagues when he was in the White House. Some of those things get forgotten in the mix-up of today's politics, but that's part of the story of this man.
So you were talking, one of you was talking about things that Jimmy Carter did in terms of the military that you didn't put it this way, but that Reagan gets credit for doing. And the deregulation actually, much more so even, he really, the reason that we can all book airline reservations as easy as we are and can and compare prices is because he did a complete deregulation of the airline industry. And that's something that I didn't catch if Thune or Johnson mentioned it, but that is something that conservatives, indeed all Americans, can embrace in a lot of ways.
Interesting. Former Senator Phil Gramm from Texas wrote a beautiful op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on his 100th birthday saying that the deregulation of airlines, of trucking, of rail, of telecommunications, and even beer, we have a craft industry.
Every time you have
because
a
he
craft beer.
deregulated beer.
Microbreweries.
Was it made this country a more competitive, innovative country. And on your point so much on bipartisanship, what I thought was so beautiful about this is, and why he would have enjoyed it so much, he worked at this bipartisanship. He had regular breakfast meetings with the Republican leadership, as he did with the Democratic leadership.
The Senate Republican leader, Howard Baker, the House Republican leader, John Rhodes. Pretty remarkable. We see members of the Biden cabinet who have been coming up. That is, of course, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, at the casket right now. But those bipartisan efforts that he made, worked in some areas, didn't work in others. Jim, you were talking about how Republicans, here we have the two senators from Georgia, and Jimmy Carter must have gotten a kick, not only that the two senators of Georgia were Democrats, but also that one was Jewish and one was African American. I'm sure as a progressive and somebody who believed in diversity that he was tickled by that. But Jim, the bipartisanship, people don't remember it now. Jimmy Carter isn't necessarily remembered for that, but it was a big part of what he tried to do.
It was, and sort of the most intense battles he had were within the Democratic Party, which had huge majorities in the legislature then. I wanted to mention two other points quickly, if I could, about Carter's faith. It's worth remembering he left the Southern Baptist movement because of their position on women. That was a very dramatic thing and consistent for him to do. The other is that we haven't talked about his role as an election monitor and democracy monitor in his post-presidency. One of his grandsons, Joshua Carter, I was in an event, not Jason, who was the politician, but Joshua, was giving a speech about 6 weeks ago about what his grandfather would say about the state of American democracy right now, and it was a cautionary tale.
I'll stay with CNN for live coverage of the funeral service for President James Earl Carter at Washington National Cathedral. On Thursday, we'll be covering that starting at 8 a.m. Wolf Blitzer has more news in the Situation Room after this quick break. We'll see you tomorrow.
Kobe believed in himself at the youngest possible age.
It's one of the most remarkable stories in sports history.
I don't want to be remembered as just a basketball player.
Kobe premieres January 25th on CNN. For more than a decade, Farxiga has been trusted again and again and again.
Farxiga.
Ask your doctor about Farxiga.
It's time to feed the dogs real food in the right amount. A healthy weight can help dogs live a longer, happier life. The Farmer's Dog makes weight management easy with fresh food pre-portioned for your dog's needs. It's an idea whose time has come.
From starting strong to it's been a week. So many ways to save. Life ready, wallet happy. That's 365 by Whole Foods Market.
Now's the time to go back in time and shine a light on the family journey that led to you. Ancestry can help you piece together the past with billions of records, photos, and more. Memberships are on sale now.
Struggling with the highs and lows of bipolar 1? Ask about Vraylar, because you are greater than your bipolar 1, and you can help take control of your symptoms with Vraylar.
Some medicines only treat the lows or highs. Vraylar treats depressive, acute manic, and mixed episodes of bipolar 1 in adults. Proven full-spectrum relief for all bipolar 1 symptoms. Vraylar is not approved for elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis due to increased risk of death or stroke. Report changes in behavior or suicidal thoughts to your doctor. Antidepressants can increase these in children and young adults. Report fever, stiff muscles or confusion, which may be life-threatening, or uncontrolled muscle movements, which may be permanent. High blood sugar, which can lead to coma or death, weight gain, and high cholesterol may occur. Difficulty moving, tremors, slow or uncontrolled body movements, restlessness and feeling like you need to move, sleepiness, nausea, vomiting, and indigestion are common. Side effects may not appear for several weeks. Visit Vraylar.com to see additional side effects. Ask about Vraylar. AbbVie could help you save.
Nice going, Lou. Nothing like a little confidence boost to help ease you back into the dating scene. Of course, that also includes having a smile you feel good about. Fortunately, Aspen Dental specializes in dentures and implants made just for you, with affordable options and flexible ways to pay. And now there's $0 down plus 0 interest if paid in full in 18 months. Helping our patients put their best smile forward. It's one more way Aspen Dental is in your corner.
Watch your step. Oh. That's why VisionWorks makes it simple to schedule an eye exam that works for you, even if you have a big trip to plan around.
Thanks.
I mean, I could see you right now. That's convenient. VisionWorks. See the difference.
Liberty Mutual customized my car insurance, so I saved hundreds. But the money I saved, thought I'd get a wax figure myself. Oh, right in the temporal lobe. Beat it, punks! Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Over the years, you've talked to him about curveballs. You've talked to him about strategy. You've talked winning seasons, losing seasons, and the off-season. Now it's time to talk about how you want to live your next season. For over 30 years, Right at Home has been providing seniors the tools they need to plan the next chapter of their lives and the care they need to stay where they want to be. Right at Home. Call or visit our website and let's start talking about living.
The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, tonight at 6 on CNN.
Closed captioning brought to you by Mesobook.com.
If you or a loved one have mesothelioma, we'll send you a free book to answer questions you may have. Call now and we'll come to you.
800-821-4000.
Happening now, Donald Trump comes out swinging as Special Counsel Jack Smith, as a federal judge blocks the release of the report on the criminal investigations of the president-elect. Trump laying out his grievances and his plans for the Justice Department during a lengthy news conference. During that same briefing with the reporters, Trump also turned his fire on U.S. allies, making fresh threats and refusing to rule out using military force to take control of the Panama Canal and Greenland. This hour, I'll speak with Trump's former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. Also tonight, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg announces major changes for both Facebook and Instagram. We're going to tell you why the social media giant is doing away with fact checkers, even as Zuckerberg admits the decision will lead to harmful content on the platforms. Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. Let's get straight to our top story tonight. Donald Trump lashing out at Special Counsel Jack Smith as a federal judge puts his report on ice. Our chief legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed is joining us right now with details. Paula, so what does this ruling actually mean for Trump?
So, Wolf, during Trump's press conference earlier today, Judge Eileen Cannon ruled that Jack Smith's final report cannot be shared outside the Justice Department until an appellate court weighs in. Now, Trump lashed out at the special counsel several times during this press conference. Let's take a listen to some of what he said.
Happening that are exciting. Just before I take office, probably,